Spirit Airlines went from a single airplane shuttling gamblers to Las Vegas and Atlantic City to what by 2015 was the most profitable US airline. But fast forward a few years later, the company has declared bankruptcy not once, but twice, and there's a question as to whether it will survive at all. This video is about the rise and fall of Spirit Airlines. Spirit was founded in 1992 as a charter airline, taking gamblers to places like Atlantic City and Las Vegas. And then it rebranded to become, well, Spirit, and focused on taking travelers at a deep discount from places like Detroit to sunny places like Fort Lauderdale and Phoenix. This was kind of a ho-hum of an idea, lots of people doing it. And in 2005, it wasn't going very well. They lost $79 million. So something had to be done differently. So in 2006, a private equity firm entered the picture, some guys named Indigo Partners. They injected capital and they brought in a guy named Ben Baldanza with the idea of executing on a turnaround. Baldanza's strategy was basically to remove every frill from the airline. If there was something you're going to be doing on Spirit, you were going to be paying extra. And this created what was in effect the first ultra low cost carrier inside of the United States. If Southwest was going to be the low cost carrier, these guys were going to be even cheaper. And at this time, Americans were accustomed to bundled services, free bags and stuff like that. But in 2010, Spirit revolutionized air travel and became the first carrier in the United States to charge you for your bags, even if you had one. And it was 45 bucks if you showed up at the airport, or $30 if you paid ahead of time. This move was actually a double-edged sword for Spirit. In one regards, it cemented their approach to being ultra low cost. They were really no frills and they meant it. At the same time, it really pissed people off. The Department of Transportation had at the time, US government official, described it as quote unquote outrageous. And what Spirit had effectively done was unbundle the idea of air travel. Basically, they made everything a la carte if you were gonna fly. If you were gonna be getting food or snacks, you paid for that. Bags, you're paying for it. Pick a seat, paying for it. And so they could advertise seats for 9 bucks or 19 bucks, and then they made up their money on the fees. And in fact, by just a few years later, they were getting 40% of their revenue from these ancillary fees alone. So while the legacy carriers, United, American, and guys like that, offered a bundled service, Spirit counter-positioned against them and basically offered everything unbundled. And counter-positioning is this idea we've talked about a lot on the channel, which is if somebody else has a firm idea of how their business is going to run, you just do something exactly the opposite and hopefully carve out a market niche for yourself. And Spirit definitely did. In 2015, Spirit had higher profit margins than any of the other legacy carriers in the United States. American, United, Delta, even Southwest. They were ahead of all of them. But industry-leading 11 to 12% profit margins didn't come without a cost. Spirit was year after year rated as the industry's most hated airline. That is saying something when people hate airlines as much as they do, and Spirit was the worst. Spirit's model, where they didn't invest in their services, also made for a very fragile airline. If weather or different types of things could step in, it was very easy for their entire system to fall apart, often for days or weeks at a time. And this would come back to bite them later on. But in the 2010s, well, things were really in the favor of Spirit. Oil prices were low, competitors hadn't woken up to what they were doing, and air travel demand was really high. So the model kept going. And management at the time famously resisted anything that would add to their costs or reduce revenue. Again, pissing off customers. It was the Spirit way of doing business. But then, at the moment things were going incredibly well, that's when everything started to go wrong for Spirit. But before I tell you about how that happened, there is a sponsor for this video. It is the conference that I host once a year called HODCO Conference. It's for people that aspire to or own multiple businesses. Please give it a shot and consider coming. We have tickets available for next year's conference. Here's a link right here, link below. The first thing to start to go against Spirit was that the competitors didn't stand still. They noticed what Spirit had been doing. So in response, they started to carve out a portion of their product, meaning some of their seats that would be sold as basic economy style fares. A Delta, an American, or a United could sell the expensive seats that were bundled with lots of extra amenities up front to people who wanted those, and in the back by the lavatory, they would sell the no-cost, basic economy, super cheap fares in the back. And whereas Spirit would only target one type of customer, the I want the cheapest fare type person, One of the legacy carriers with this new model of having basic economy could bring in people from all ends of the spectrum of customers, everybody from the cheapest fare to the luxury folks who are sitting up front. Similarly, other airlines started to copy Spirit in terms of the model entirely. Frontier and Allegiant came in and did their own versions of the ultra low-cost carrier model, often competing on the same exact routes that Spirit was on, well, basically compressing margins and profits. So in order to compete, Spirit decided to try to get bigger. They grew at double-digit rates for the next couple of years with the idea of if they got bigger, well, they could compete against the ultra low-cost carriers and compete against the massive networks that the legacy carriers like American and United brought to bear. By 2021 and 2022, they were ambitiously launching new routes. Famously, the example of 30 new routes from one of its Miami hubs. And this started to put a strain on the infrastructure of Spirit itself. It was growth at all costs. And in 2021, a massive combination of bad weather, IT meltdowns, staff outages, and all that kind of stuff led to a 10-day basic shutdown of the airline, where thousands of passengers were stranded and 2,800 flights were canceled over that time, creating a massive headache for Spirit. They lost $50 million during this 10-day episode. One insider famously said that the airline had been trying to run an airline of 167 planes on an infrastructure built for 50. Years of underinvestment and over-aggressive growth had finally caught up to them, and it was a sign that they had pushed too far, too fast. But look, in an era where it's incredibly difficult to get new planes out of Boeing or Airbus, and gates are hard to come by, even a failing airline like Spirit has a huge amount of residual value to other airlines who also want to compete. And so in 2022, two suitors came calling. One was fellow ultra low-cost carrier Frontier, and another was JetBlue. In 2022, they made a deal to sell the airline to fellow ultra low-cost carrier Frontier, but then another white knight came in, and JetBlue came in with a higher all-cash offer with the idea of merging with Spirit, taking their gates, planes, and assets to grow their own business. Spirit's board had actually been wary of JetBlue's offer. It was higher, it was better, and it was all cash. But they were worried about something that would come to bear on it, which was the Department of Justice. And the DOJ sued the merger and sued the companies trying to block the merger, saying that it would adversely harm consumers. And as much as we all hate Spirit, there was something that was actually truly genius and good for the world about Spirit existing. Whenever Spirit would enter a market, you would see fares from the other competitor airlines go down on an average of about 20%. In other words, by having Spirit, which was universally hated, in a market, it would save money for the rest of us. And the DOJ, to some extent rightly, saw that the removal of Spirit as an independent airline would be bad for the consumer. And I kind of agree with them. But if I had been an executive at JetBlue or Spirit, I would have been absolutely pissed to have the DOJ step in at this moment, because that same thing, the Department of Justice and all the folks on the government side had let folks like United, Delta, American, and even Southwest gobble up competitors for most of the 2000s. And that's where we end up where we are today, with too few airlines locking up all the gates and charging really high fares. After a lengthy court battle where JetBlue even agreed to drop gates and create more competition post-merger, the judge finally ruled in February of 2024 that the merger couldn't go forth, and the whole deal got dropped. After this, JetBlue dropped a proposed $3.9 million merger in March 2024. And Spirit, for their time and trouble, received a $69 million breakup fee, which is a drop in a bucket compared to what the shareholders would have gotten. The failed merger came basically as Spirit was already under severe financial strain. The things that had worked for it back in the 2010s when it was so profitable, well, those things were all gone. Air travel was down post-pandemic. The other carriers were coming after their business, and their ability to just offer things cheaper, well, inflation had hit them too, and they were in trouble. And Spirit, which had added a third more capacity along its route since 2019, now found itself unable to fill planes. And in 2023, they incurred significant losses from operations. In 2024, Spirit showed a staggering $1.2 billion in loss, and basically it wiped out all of the equity, their balance sheet, and anything that was there from a shareholder perspective, it was gone, and the shares were basically worth nothing. With the JetBlue deal dead, no white knight in sight, eventually the folks in charge of Spirit hit the eject button. In November 2024, they filed bankruptcy and filed for Chapter 11, looking for help from their creditors and the money they owed to other people from the bankruptcy court. And in bankruptcy, one of the things you can redo is restructure the company. That means the creditors, the debtors, the shareholders, everybody kind of gets reshuffled in a way that ideally can keep the company going. So they reshuffled what they had, the $795 million in debt for Spirit, that got renegotiated and converted to equity, and they raised $350 million from new investors to recapitalize the company. But this structuring done in the bankruptcy process just proved to be a quick fix. Didn't fix the underlying issues about what had made Spirit go up and then go down. None of the fuel cost issues were dealt with. The issues around their competitive advantage getting eroded away, the increased competition, their overexpansion, none of those things were really fixed. In August 2025, continued to burn cash. They went back to bankruptcy again and hit Chapter 11. This time, they're back with a new and different plan to try to save the airline. They're going to shrink to survive. They're going to get rid of a lot of their planes. They're going to reduce their routes to focus on what's competitive and where they can make money. And ultimately, they have close to 200 planes now. They may return up to 100 of those, shrinking and leaving Spirit as a drastically smaller airline than what we've all known it as. And through this second bankruptcy, the idea and hope is that Spirit can emerge as a smaller, more profitable, and sustainable carrier. I think this story for me is a big lesson around the different types of competitive advantages. There are competitive advantages they can have that are temporary, like the one Spirit had that will last for a period of time but can get eroded away. And there are sustainable ones that will survive and are durable for a long period of time. I think the big mistake, if you look back at Spirit, was assuming that the ultra low cost carrier model was one that was truly a sustainable advantage. When in reality, the other folks who could come in from a legacy carrier standpoint, they just unbundled and rebundled exactly what Spirit was doing. And that's what's crushed them. All right, let me know what you think of this story of Spirit. What would you have done differently in their situation? Do you fly Spirit? I actually like it. Let me know in the comments below. I try to read all of them. Thanks for being here. Catch you next time.